right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, geez.
Start now.
All right. As the leader of the affirmative team, I strongly affirm today's resolution that Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination for president. Okay, so definitions are pretty contextual. In this case, I'm just going to move straight into the case. So our first contention is popular opinion. All right, so the most recent polls have revealed, most recent national polls have revealed that Donald Trump is the clear leader with 32% of the Republican voters supporting him. Now, the person in second place is Ben Carson with only 19%, almost half the percentage that Donald Trump has right now. Now, the people in third place, it's kind of contested. It varies from poll to poll, but the support for their percentage is considerably lower than Donald Trump. Now, polls are clearly the best indicator of public opinion, and people actually resonate with Donald Trump's messages, especially with, for example, immigration. According to a Huffington Post survey, 39% of Republicans strongly agree with his views on immigration, and another 27% agree with his views on immigration. Okay. In addition, Trump has experience in making people like him. According to CNN, he is one of the most experienced and successful self-promoters in America. He's practically driven by attention, and he's not easily faced down. So clearly he will win. Okay. Second contention is money. All right. So ordinarily, what happens is that candidates who have no support, they don't have any money because no one supports them, and they're forced to drop out. And that's the case with Scott Walker. However, Donald Trump does have support, and he does have a lot of money. So even if he didn't have support, he would have money. So he does have money, and he'll be able to fund himself throughout this race. He won't have to drop out of the race for the GOP nomination like Scott Walker or any other of the candidates who could at any time lose support and then lose their stream of donations for their yeah. So this is unique to Donald Trump. He has a lot of money by himself, even without public support. Yeah. This is so sad. Okay. Third contention, other candidates won't win. So I'm going to go over two major candidates in the Republican Republican race for president. Ben Carson, as we've said before, he's second in the polls, 19% of Republican voters support him. Okay, so he's never held elective office. And most Americans vote for people who have previously been vice presidents, senators, or governors. The last person who didn't fit in and who hadn't held any of these offices was Eisenhower. And he had a military career that placed him in the perfect position to run for president. Ben Carson is a neurosurgeon. Or surgeon. Neurosurgeon. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so he really has no support among elected Republican officials or any support from major figures in the Republican Party. And moderate Republicans wouldn't support him either. They would support other Republican candidates. So clearly, Ben Carson isn't a viable opponent against Donald Trump. Carly Fiorina. So she used to be the economic advisor to Republican presidential candidate John Kerry back in 2008. And she has a very interesting record. In 2008, she supported his cap-and-trade policy, which is essentially a no-no in the Republican Party. Yeah. And so in 2010, she just completely abandoned it. She up and abandoned this policy that she had basically been praising for so long. And she did this once again. This is not just a one-time thing. In the 2008 recession, she defended the $700 billion bailout for Wall Street, but then in 2010, she spoke out against bailouts. So she's kind of proven herself to be very hypocritical and very contradictory. Okay, so first of all, a lot of her positions, they don't make Republicans happy. And the fact that she went against them and just kind of completely changed her whole mindset, it's not really very comforting to these Republican voters, knowing that at any time she could change her mindset and just go back to supporting cap and trade and these great policies, but policies that actually acknowledge climate change. Yes. Okay. And in addition, these remarks, her speeches of praising these policies, have actually been recorded on video. And so these videos can easily be played as evidence to prove to Republican voters that she's not a viable candidate. So in today's debate, we provided you 3 reasons why Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination. 1, he has popular opinion behind him. 2, he has enough money to fund himself in the race. Even if he doesn't have any support, he has enough money to keep campaigning. 3, other candidates just aren't viable as his opponents. As I said before, 2 of the major candidates, Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina, they just are not going to win the Republican nomination in 2016. And so for these reasons, I strongly affirm today's resolution.
So, as brief after roadmap in this speech, I'm going to be negating refuting the affirmative side's contentions and then presenting the negation. So, is everyone ready? Yes, all. Okay, so time begins now. So, resolve. I strongly negate the resolution that Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination for president. I'll begin by addressing the affirmative piece. So, our opponent's first contention was that national polls reveal that Donald Trump is the clear leader, saying that he has 32% support. And they also said that polls are the best indicator of public opinion. However, they provided no card for this, and I have evidence here that goes exactly against
cards.
it. No evidence for you to have source or whatever. Okay, and I have evidence, hard evidence, that goes against this. So, in the last election, the Republican candidate Giuliani was in the lead for in the same time period that Trump was, and he had he had support in the 30s and 40s% in the polls that he sustained for multiple months before the election. Now, Donald Trump currently is having trouble sustaining over 25%, and that's over the past few months. Now, Giuliani had to sustain the support in the 30s and 40%, but before the election, all his support declined, and he eventually came out 3rd in the race. So the polls at this time of the year are so unsure and so and they're completely based off speculations that they're not a reliable source for predicting the presidential campaign. Yes?
Do you have in turn a reliable source that
will
provide a reason that Donald Trump won't win?
Yes, The Guardian has stated that the polls, like Giuliani, Donald Trump will have the same fate as Giuliani, and that his support will decline because it's solely based off hype, just as Giuliani's was in the last presidential election. So their second contention was that Donald Trump has money and support, so he'll be able to fund himself throughout the entire campaign. They failed to indicate how the other candidates do not have support. Like Jeb Bush, he not only has name recognition but support from his wealthy family, the Bush family. Their third contention was that the other candidates won't win. They stated 2 examples of Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina. But I'd like to bring up the example of Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush not only has name recognition, but he's a moderate conservative. And as it has been shown many times in the past, moderate conservatives are the ones who will end up winning the election. They also stated that other Republican candidates were irrational and hypocritical, like Carly Fiorina, so they wouldn't be able to win the nomination. Except Donald Trump himself has proven to be irrational and hypocritical on many occasions. I'm sure you're aware of his many offensive quotes. Anyways, so now I'm going to be moving on into the negation case. So our first contention is that Donald Trump's views are too extremely rightist for him to win the nomination. The political scientist, extremist Republicans have not won elections in the past. As Larry Sabato, a famous political scientist, says, if Trump is nominated, then everything we know about presidential elections is wrong. And his reason for this statement is because Republicans like Trump, who are very open and vocal about their extremely conservative views, have not won elections in the past. For example, as USA Today states, the GOP nominees who lost the popular vote in 5 of the last 6 elections do not refer to themselves as moderates. And Ronald Reagan, as stated by The Week, was the first and only movement conservative ever elected president. But on the other hand, all the rest of the presidents have been moderate conservatives. So we can see that people with extremely rightist views like Donald Trump do not have a chance of winning the race. In addition, Donald Trump does not have backing from the government because of these views. The Washington, D.C. crowd wants nothing to do with him, says Larry Sabato, the political scientist. He even has had his invitations rescinded from different GOP gatherings in Atlanta because his extremist views are actually losing him support. Our second contention is that Trump's poll numbers not only provide no support that he will win the nomination, but actually go against it. We can turn to the example of Rudy Giuliani in 2008, as I was discussing when refuting my opponent's contentions. Giuliani had poll numbers in the 30s to 40% for a long time, many months, just as Donald Trump has had now, until they suddenly declined as elections approached. Trump, as I mentioned earlier, currently can't even sustain over 25%. So this shows that we cannot look to polls. We can only look to Trump's personality and the history of which type of conservative has won the past to predict the outcome of the election. Because these poll numbers, as they are speculative and uncertain, are completely irrelevant in the race. And they've been proven to be unreliable and uncertain in the past. So we cannot base predictions on Trump's success on these poll numbers. But these poll numbers actually go to indicate, like Giuliani, Trump might end up being less successful because his numbers will decline. So I strongly debate
Hello, friends. Okay, are you ready? Can I use your timer on my phone died? Yeah.
Can I get the link? Just keep talking every once in a while.
Okay. As a member of the affirmative team, I strongly affirm today's resolution that Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination for president. As a brief roadmap for this speech, I'll first be going over the affirmative case before moving on to refute the negation case. Now, in refutation to our first contention, which was that of popular opinion, how the polls and other indicators of success for Donald Trump indicate that he will indeed get the Republican nomination. In response to this, all they basically said was that there's no evidence that polls are good. The only example they were able to give in this case was this Rudy Giuliani. Okay, that guy, Rudy Giuliani, who they did not actually provide any further details about. Most people don't really know about him, so he's not really a very good example in telling us the trends of how the polls work. Furthermore, that response to our contention is in and of itself hypocritical and doesn't make sense. They're basically saying that you can't use the polls to say that Donald Trump will win. By definition, that means they can't say that they can use the polls to say that Donald Trump won't win. Because either way, what they're claiming is that the polls are unreliable. If we're claiming the polls are unreliable, then not only can we not claim that they mean Donald Trump will win, they certainly cannot claim that they mean that Donald Trump won't win. Because like we said, they do give a sincere indication that Donald Trump received support from the American public, from the American Republican public. Right. They are a clear indicator, whether we like it or not, and whether or not the trends may go one way or another. It's a clear indicator, and it is one of the best indicators we currently have that Donald Trump is going to win the nomination. So even if the polls are unreliable, that means that Meg can't say that they mean that he's not going to win. Now, they also did not address the other points under that contention, one of which was that in general, not even separate out of the polls, but just out of surveys that many different organizations conducted about Donald Trump's opinions, 39% of Republicans strongly agree with his views on immigration, while 27% agree. That is more than 50, significantly more than 50% of Republicans who are agreeing in some form with Donald Trump's views. That's actually separate from the polls. So not only did they not address this, it also is just adding further evidence to the idea that the Republican public is into Donald Trump. Again, our third subpoint under the point of popular opinion is that he has experience in making people like him. This is really important because he's basically been around for 25 years making people like him, gaining attention, and that's what he's really good at, and that's why he's winning. And what a Republican or any presidential candidate needs is that kind of charisma that Donald Trump has with the general public. And that's what he has, and that's another clear reason why popular opinion is going his way. Now, our second question was about money and how Donald Trump is unique in the fact that he has so much money that he won't actually have to drop out, unlike other candidates. All they said in response to this is that other candidates have support and money as well. While this is true, Jeb Bush does have money. He's had to raise his money due to his support. The thing that's unique about Donald Trump is that even if he loses his support, he's not going to drop out, and he's going to fight his way to get back to the top because he has the money to be able to do that, regardless of whether he has support or not. Donald Trump, according to Forbes, has a net worth of about $8 billion. That's a lot of money, and that's enough to get him through the primaries. Now, our third contention was about how the other candidates wouldn't win. We talked about Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina. In response to this, they basically just talked about Jeb Bush and how he actually is probably going to win because he's a moderate conservative. And then they also talked about how Donald Trump is irrational and hypocritical like Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina. Now the issue here is that Donald Trump is not actually hypocritical. He's highly irrational, I think most of us would agree here, but he's not a hypocrite. He says what he means and he means what he says. That's actually what people really like about him because he's not lying, he's not fooling around. He's saying what he means, and people are clearly resonating with that, and so he's actually being a lot less shady than many of the other candidates, and that's a clear reason why he's going to win. Now I'm going to move on to address the mediation case. Now their first contention was that, in essentiality, Donald Trump's views are too right, they're too extremist Republican. And they basically talked about how extremist Republicans in general do not win. But then they went on to say that Ronald Reagan, was the first and only extreme Republican to win the presidential election. But here's the thing, literally all of the Republican candidates are trying to emulate Reagan, and they're very clear about that. They talk all the time about how Reagan this, Reagan that, Reagan was so great, and how they are like Reagan. Donald Trump especially talks about this, and it's clearly gaining his support. If all the Republicans are trying to be like Reagan, then that's a clear indicator that that far-right Republican extremism, whatever, is actually very popular among the Republicans. In addition, I've talked about how people are highly in favor of Donald Trump's views, 32% strongly agreeing on his views on immigration. So again, another clear indicator that it's not actually bad to be far-right, it's actually gaining Donald Trump a lot of enthusiasm. Now they also talked about, under that point, how there's no backing from other politicians. Now here's the thing, it's true, the other people in Washington don't like Donald Trump. But that's actually why people like Donald Trump. One of Donald Trump's main messages is that he's not part of the political machine, quote unquote. He's not part of the Washington machine. He's not buying in to the typical, way that politicians act, way that politicians get money, the way that politicians go through the presidential election. And that's ending up working out really well for him, because people like the idea that he's not just going to be another candidate who makes false promises. People really believe that Donald Trump is not buying in, and that Donald Trump is unique, and that he's not going to lie to them or just do things for his own benefit. Now, our second contention was about the polls. It was essentially just rehashing their response that the polls are uncertain and all that. Again, their statement was that polls can give no indication or prediction of success for Donald Trump. Then they went on to say that because they're unreliable, they're actually in some way going to mean he's going to lose, which, like I said before, doesn't make sense and is innately hypocritical. So for these reasons, I strongly affirm today's resolution and urge an affirmative vote.
Wow. Traitor.
What, you want me to? You guys don't even need my help.
Her lid. No. No. I forbid it.
Forbid what?
The quotes.
Okay.
No, the quotes.
Elaine,
Go out the quotes.
Elaine, yeah.
As a member of the negation team, I strongly negate today's resolution that Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination for the president. In this speech, I will be going over the first map, on case, and then off case. So, the affirmative team's first contention was about popular opinion and how he's leading in polls, so he'll win. And then we refuted this by saying how polls don't mean much, and then they just said we were being hypocritical. But the way they're interpreting these polls are, our interpretation of these surveys are not the same as theirs. So their way is incorrect because
I'm not doing anything.
okay, their interpretation is the problem we have with their contention, because these polls are showing how people are these polls are showing what people are these polls are just showing what people feel right now, and it's a whole year before the election is actually happening. So just because he's in the lead right now doesn't mean that he'll be in the lead next year when the elections actually happen. And that is why this connects with Giovanni, because so the way we're using these polls is we're looking at the patterns of how they didn't work in the past, and those have been more consistent with their views on how polls have shown people have won just because they were popular earlier.
Okay, so to clarify, to make sure that the affirmative team is not confused, they're saying that polls are that because he's in the lead right now, he'll win the Republican nomination for president. But we're saying that it's too early for that to be. Yes.
So are you essentially saying that because Donald Trump is in the lead right now, he by definition will not be in the lead later on?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because there's a ceiling on how many people will support him, especially with his very extreme views on people, and they are very offensive to many people. Yes.
So what's the ceiling? Like, how many Republican voters will support him? Like, what's the limit?
There is a ceiling. We don't need to provide a ceiling for you, but there is a ceiling somewhere, and it's not where they think it is.
Is it not 100%?
And they also brought up how 39% from some website agree with his immigration views, but these polls don't show everyone in the Republican Party who are voting, and these people choosing to participate in these might only care about Donald Trump, which means to show that because they care about Donald Trump, they support his views, and that is a big part of that 39% who agree with his views. Okay. They also brought up how people like him, and they also brought up how people like him and how he's good with people, but just because people like what he's saying right now doesn't mean that they'll like him when he actually tells everyone what his policies are, or have a more clear, or provide everyone a more clear version of what his policies are going to be. So just because people like what he's saying doesn't mean that people will like what he's actually going to do. I'll take your question later if I have time. So, their second question was that money and how he has support and lots of money, and then we talked about Jeb Bush, and then they said that Jeb Bush needs to raise money and Donald Trump doesn't because he's rich. But money can't buy everything. Money can't buy people who support his views. I'll take your question. Money, just because he has money doesn't mean that money can't make more people support Donald Trump. And as we have stated before, polls don't show everything because it's a year before the election. Okay. Their third contention was how others won't win, and they talked about Ben Carson and Carly P. Yeah. And we refused with talking about Jeb Bush, who was a moderate conservative, and they didn't refuse. We also said that Donald Trump is hypocritical and like people they brought up, but they said that he's not a hypocrite because he means what he says. We can refute this with one example of his views on immigration. His parents immigrated to the United States from Germany, but he is trying to tell all these immigrants to get out of America. How is that not hypocritical? If he had these views, or if these policies with his views were in place before his parents came to America, he wouldn't even be in America running for president. He used to be pro-choice too, and now he's not. Our first contention was that of his views are too right, and they talked about how Donald Trump polls, and I already refuted this earlier, and they said our thing doesn't make sense, but I also refuted that too.
as brief off-time roadmap, in this speech I will address the affirmative case and the negation case and go over voting issues. So I strongly negate the resolution that Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination for president. So, as for the affirmative case, our opponent's first point was that the national polls revealed that Donald Trump is the leader. Except as we've continued to state, these polls are unreliable. And so these polls are unreliable because it's so early on in the election that they're just based on speculation. We also have stated that in the past the polls have shown that polling patterns that are the same as Donald Trump have all ended badly, and we gave the example of Rudy Giuliani. They said that by stating this fact, we are being hypocritical. But as my opponent explained in her last speech, by saying that, by looking for patterns in the polls that have occurred in the past, that's not something that's unreliable. Looking at patterns of polls in the present is unreliable because we don't know the end result. But in the past, we've seen the end result of those polls and the patterns. We have graphs, so we can compare it with the Rudy Giuliani, who has views and personality much like Donald Trump, and we can look at these definitive graphs and be able to make a conclusion, while we cannot from the polls that are occurring right now. So, by knowing these polls are unreliable, we can say that the opponent's first contention is irrelevant because it doesn't matter how much support the polls say Donald Trump has. We know the polls are speculative and unreasonable, so we cannot look to them. So, our opponent's second contention was about money, and that Donald Trump will be able to fund himself enough support, even will able to fund his campaign even if he loses all support. And we refuted that by saying that other candidates do have support as well and money from their families. And their only reason to why these candidates wouldn't be successful was by those polls, that if those candidates lose their support, they won't be able to sustain themselves. However, we cannot tell if these candidates are going to lose their support, and we can actually tell the opposite by the past definitive patterns that the polls have shown, which is that Donald Trump and candidates like Donald Trump have not been successful. Thirdly, they stated that other candidates cannot win, and they gave the examples of Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina, but saying they're irrational and hypocritical. But as my opponent stated before, that Donald Trump is also irrational and hypocritical. His parents were immigrants, but his policies he advocates for are very anti-immigration. In addition, he used to be pro-choice, but now he advocates pro-life ideas. So now I'm going to move on to the negation case. So, as our first contention was that Trump's views are too extremely rightist, and our opponent's response to that was they kept saying that like extremely rightist views are very like people like they said how people look up to Reagan and his extremely rightist views. But even if extremely rightist views are trending or whatever right now, they have proven to never actually bring anything about. People who are extremely rightist never have won the election, which is a very, very clear indicator that they won't win the election now. So now I'm going to move on to voters' issues, and I first want to address the evidence in this case. My partner and I gave evidence from clear sources like USA Today and other newspapers that show these facts, like that the polls are unreliable. Well, our opponents gave evidence like these surveys, which they didn't provide a source for, and like my opponent said, they could be really biased because people who our supporters of Trump could be the only ones who are filling out these surveys. In addition, I want to go over the. Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna go voters. One brief thing on case, and then my own voters. I'm gonna let you Holly voters. Okay. As the leader of the affirmative team, I strongly affirm today's resolution that Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination for president. Okay, their one voter issue is about evidence. So their main concern is that we didn't provide a source for our surveys in our first contention. However, I did mention in my first speech that yes, we do have a source, Huffington Post, CNN. We've mentioned a lot of sources throughout this debate that the negation team has ignored. I did mention this in my first speech, so stop giving me that one. Okay, moving on to address case really quickly. Second contention, last negation speech was that money can't buy everything. Then why do people bother raising money for their presidential campaigns? Like, why? It's a very important issue. Yeah. Money is important, and disregard the negation team's response. Oh, you know what? I didn't have a chance to refute this earlier in my. So you know what? This is my time to go over all of this. Okay,
Oh my gosh.
everything is fair game. Okay.
Point not taken.
Okay, I'm gonna go voters now. Okay, there's gonna be a theme throughout this, which is that of Donald Trump's uniqueness. I'm gonna go one self-promotion. All right, so this has been a sub-point under our first contention, which really the negation team has ignored throughout the entire debate. My partner brought it up again in her speech. There was only one negation response. Stop. Okay, so self-promotion. So Donald Trump is very good at promoting himself. He's very good at drawing attention, and he's very hard to go against and say, well, I think you're wrong, etc., etc. Like, he's just very good at self-promotion. It's very hard to go up against him. Okay, so yeah, this is extremely unique to Donald Trump. Like, he's just very good at self-promotion. He has a lot of experience in this area. Second, let's talk about our third contention, the other candidates. All right, so really, they've ignored, like, kind of the whole content at this point. They really only refuted our tagline, that of other candidates won't win, and they started, like, bringing up this example of Jeb Bush, which my partner has refuted. Okay, so they've just completely ignored, like, all this text about Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina. So one major point that I'd like to bring up is that for Carly Fiorina, her hypocrisy will hurt her. Like, this going against herself, going back on her cap and trade policy, on her policy for bailouts, like, that will actually hurt her, unlike Donald Trump, because simply, as we've said before, he's good at self-promotion, and he has enough money to get him past the primaries. And in addition, Ben Carson, like, before he has no political experience at all. Like, Donald Trump at least has experience in business. But Ben Carson is a neurosurgeon, and that doesn't really place him in the optimal position to run for president, to have political experience. Yeah. So as we can see here, like, this issue of Trump also being hypocritical, well, he can actually get past that because he has enough money for people to just completely disregard that. Third of all, let's talk about the negation team's first contention, about how Donald Trump's views are too rightist. Now, okay, second negation speech didn't have enough time to refute this. So basically, extend my partner's reputations. Yeah, they can't do anything about it. I have ultimate power. Yeah, extend. So basically, as my partner said, so all these candidates, they try to emulate Reagan, right? So clearly, like, the fact that he's so rightist isn't really a problem. Yeah. And as my partner said in her speech, the reason why people like him, he's so honest. He's really honest, and he claims that he's not a part of the political machine. And that claim appeals to a lot of people. Okay. Yeah. Donald Donald Trump is unique. He has money. Vote ass.
Make America great again.
Vote ass.
Yeah, no. I'm just gonna give you guys some brief stuff because we do not have much time. But again, if you want more, just email me. First of all, let's see, Holly, when you're doing voter issues, if your partner's already refuted like everything, I would suggest refute the things she didn't have time to refute. So what Mei-Mei said to your first point, and then go straight into voters. You can bring up the different concepts in your voter issues, but you don't need to go back through all of that again. It gets a little too repetitive. Let's see. You guys also want, first of all, where did you guys get your poll numbers? Because the most recent ones I've heard are that Donald Trump is at 27 and Ben Carson's at 24.
Oh, really?
Which puts them
Well,
a whole
yeah,
lot
I know.
closer.
I know. I got the notification.
I
That was
have
from this morning, but I decided to use the ones from 3 days ago.
Mei-Mei!
Wait, I have.
Bad girl. Yes, girl? Are you like raising your hand?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, but it's true. Ben Carson is.
Could the negation team say that if Ben Carson isn't qualified because he has no political experience, shouldn't Donald Trump also?
CJT was a business experience. He negotiates. He hates China. Hello.
Yeah, he doesn't really have political experience either. I
So
would
we
say,
could argue that, right?
yeah. You guys need to find something better as why Ben Carson wouldn't be a good president. You can say he doesn't have experience, but that won't necessarily mean he couldn't be good. Like, yeah, he doesn't have quite as much experience, but if his policies are decent and he has enough advisors, he could theoretically be okay. So you need something even stronger why he would be bad. Because right now he is the very close second runner. So if you guys ever have to do anything with Republican nominations, for at least now, you will be dealing with Donald Trump and Ben Carson. So even though no one knew who Ben Carson was until like a month ago,
He didn't even like
Kind of
know
back.
anything until like a month ago.
yeah, I don't know how he got so high in the polls.
It's probably because he's African American.
I
And they
mean,
want another.
he's not quite as offensive as some of the other Republicans, but
That's really not saying very much.
no, it's really not. It's
He
really not.
did really well in the first
Like,
debate.
The charming Nazi, you know.
Okay, also, you guys can bring up that Trump's supporters aren't necessarily ones who are voting. Like, a lot of his supporters are people who don't vote. They're just people who are like, whoa, he's really cool, but that doesn't mean they're going to vote in the actual primary or the general election. Also, another point to bring up, Republicans aren't stupid. Like, the party establishment knows that Trump will never win the Democrats, right? So the party establishment will be fighting as hard as they can to get someone other than Trump. And while the party establishment isn't everything, they are a force to be reckoned with. So that should be taken into account. Let's see. Daeny, if you're going to say extend, talk about impact as well. Also, guys, Reagan wasn't like super hardcore right. He was like by modern standards, he would probably be a little liberal for the politics. So yeah, just keep that in mind. He's not like super rightist, so that doesn't really work. I would also, if you're going to be talking about polls and support, talk more about what demographics they appeal to. Right? So not just what their current poll numbers are, which can be unreliable, but also he's applying to this demographic. This demographic is either super important or super irrelevant, whichever you are, right? Does that make sense? So like logic your way with
The white middle class people.
Do you guys have anything you want to add or any questions or anything? No? Was that helpful to watch that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, we're done. It's 5. We're back at home.
I'll get to the daily sign.
Now. Just so you know.
You signed me in.
You can sign yourself in. It's online. You can go home and do it from home.
There's no need to sign anyone in. It's not like last year where I had to get on a particular computer and someone's account. Y'all can do it yourself.
Well, do you have
I really like it. I think
Notebook.
a great picture.
Do you want notebooks from me? You can't get your own notebook.
So are we gonna